Hi guys, welcome back to my countdown of my top 20 favorite films of all times list. Let's not waste any time, let's get right into number 14. Number 14. The Blair Witch Project. I want to say right off the bat that I'm very sorry I haven't been uploading for the last few days. I'm in the middle of my college year, so I can't really, as much as I want to devote time to doing this and to finishing off this list for the month, there are going to be a couple of speed bumps, but I'm going to do a couple of videos in a row so that I can catch up as well as prepare for the following days after. Blair Witch Project. I saw this movie for the first time in the 10th grade, and it scared the living daylights out of me. I was scared for about the next 2 days. I didn't sleep very well. There's two factors about this that kind of scared me as well, is the fact that my dad lives in Maryland, which is the state that the Blair Witch Project supposedly takes place in. At the time, I wasn't aware of the found footage genre. I wasn't really into horror films in the 10th grade, so I kind of got suckered into it because it was Halloween, and I had friends at the time that love horror films, so I was kind of forced to sit through it, and I didn't really want to, but of course I ended up doing it. I also have a cottage that my mother has up north, and it's just surrounded by forests that look a lot like the setting that the Blair Witch Project kind of takes place in, and it's just kind of, it terrified the living hell out of me, and it kind of always stuck with me. Now I will watch it on repeat with the commentary on. I don't really want to talk about it too much because, not because of spoilers or anything like that. I mean, at this point, everybody knows the basic summary of Blair Witch Project. You know, three college kids go missing in the woods of Blair, or what is it? Burkittsville, yes, Burkittsville, Maryland, which is not where they actually filmed it. See, that's the thing. I've watched the commentary so many times, and I've done enough research on the films and on the filmmakers to know like where stuff was actually filmed and where exactly it took place. And actually, my stepbrother's wedding was being held within 5 miles of where the movie was filmed. So that's just another little tidbit of information. There's really not much I can elaborate on this movie. It's extremely well known, and it's basically the movie that has launched the 1,000 found footage movies that we currently have in our modern era. I mean, at the time that this movie came out, the campaigning and the marketing for it had pretty much never really been heard of before. I mean, the only other movie to have done a marketing scheme like this to portray it as real and authentic is even remotely like that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even then they weren't claiming that the movie itself was real, just that it was based on a real event. But this was something that was kind of unseen, and for the longest time you had people questioning as to whether or not the footage was real, as if, you know, these were not actors, as in. Of course, now we all obviously know that that's not true, but it was such a phenomenon when it came out, and it was still a phenomenon when I first saw it. Because 10th grade for me was a long time after this movie came out. I was in the 10th grade in 2005, so that would have been 6 years after the movie had originally come out. That's a long time, you know, for the hype to die down, and even at that point, you know, it still was going on and people were still talking about it. I was originally going to put Paranormal Activity on my list, and then when I started talking about Paranormal Activity, I started realizing that the reason I like Paranormal Activity so much is because I like Blair Witch so much. So I'm like, okay, I have to give credit where credit's due. The main reason I like found footage genre is because Blair Witch, I think, really set the standard for what you should expect from a found footage movie. The sense of authenticity, that this is not faked, that this is not being handled stage by stage by some director or some producer. When I listened to the commentaries, the most you really hear about in terms of the direction and the producing was that the actors basically would just have these little notes that they would find on trees, and every so often the director would step in and tell them, you know, this is where you should go with this. And if characters were getting into too many arguments, you know, they would say, you know, you have to apologize to them, or else you're going to lose your crew, that kind of stuff. And it was so interesting to figure out how they did this, because they did it on such a small budget. They did it over the course of 6 days. the actors were literally only running on a few things of food and water. Like, they were living the movie. And it's just so interesting to learn about the perspective of how they would go about making something like this. And it really puts to shame whenever I do see found footage movies and then their behind the scenes stuff, because especially because after I put out my Grave Encounters 2 review, I decided to do a little bit more research on it to figure out, what kind of process was put through for this film, like how different was it from the first film, like what may have changed that caused it to, what I think, make a huge drastic change from one film to another. And there's actually a couple behind the scenes videos for Grave Encounters 2. And the way that they filmed it is hardly found footage. I mean, you have these staged setups, you have characters that are doing takes. Like, they're not just grabbing a camera and just trying and going off the cuff and trying to figure out what they want to say based on emotion and knowing what their characters' motivations are. The way that I know Blair Witch was done, the way that I know most of Paranormal Activity has been done. This was, the Grave Encounters 2 movie was so scripted and so meticulous, and yet it was also shot like a music video. Like, that's sort of my main problem with it, is if you watch the behind the scenes footage, there's crew everywhere, even in scenes where you would expect that, you would just need the main characters holding a camera and you don't really need crew standing around, and it may be ruining the atmosphere for the actors. No, like the scene that I was so glowing about in the Grave Encounters 2 video, which was the security guard's death, which had multiple angles, but that's because there's more than one camera. And I find out through the behind the scenes thing that not only do they have the actors holding cameras, they have crewmen holding cameras, they have a full-blown, basically a proper film camera, the one that they would normally use for films, not, handhelds. Like, these aren't even shoulder cameras. Like, that's what was really bothering me. This was on a dolly. This was on a track. I'm like, this, to me, I know that you don't have to follow a specific set of rules to do a found footage movie, or any movie in particular. If you want to film it a certain way, go ahead. But to me, found footage has a certain aesthetic to it that you can only get through a certain kind of direction and a certain style of filming. And that is giving your actors the cameras and telling them, shoot it the way the character would shoot it. Here's your motivation. Here's the direction we need you to go in. Go. And you see what comes out of that. And that's mainly how Blair Witch was done. The thing that made Blair Witch so scary, I think, is that you are going through the exact same thing that the actors are going through, because they don't even really know what's after them. They never see anything. They don't really, all they really do is hear things, and things start attacking them, and things start leaving things outside their tent. Their stuff gets thrown everywhere. And then at the end, of course, we have the one of them gets kidnapped, and of course at the end you have the most iconic scene of Blair Witch, well, there's two iconic scenes. One is the confessional that Heather does, which is an incredibly powerful scene, I think. She comes off as extremely genuine and so sincere and just genuinely terrified. That feeling of too scared to close my eyes, I'm too scared to open them. I know I was like that for the longest time, because especially, like, again, I wasn't always into horror films. I've only recently gotten into horror films. At least within the last 3 or 4 years have I really gotten into watching horror films. Before that, I could not stand horror films. I didn't like being scared. It would keep me up at night. It would give me nightmares. And now I've learned how to separate the fantasy from reality. Before, I had a bit of a hard time with that. But at the time, it really felt so real to me, because those are exact emotions. That's the exact way I would describe something, is you're too scared to close your eyes because you want to be able to see what's attacking you so you can defend yourself. But at the exact same time, you don't want to fucking see what's attacking you or what's coming after you. You want to close your eyes and you want to pretend like it's all a dream. You want to pretend it's just a really bad nightmare. And it's just such a great moment, I think, in horror film. Just not even just found footage, in horror film in general, to have a character that is that able to connect to the audience and telegraph the exact emotion that you should feel in this scenario. And that's sort of my main thing with most found footage, is that keep it simple. Found footage nowadays has way too many complexities. Again, another big issue I had with Grave Encounters 2, which was that there was just way too much that they had to cover, way too many loose ends they had to try and tie up. And they added details that ended up making the world less realistic and less believable. The first movie was nice because it just it was kind of open-ended, it was ambiguous, but not in a way where it was... I mean, the Blair Witch ends in an ambiguous way. You don't really know exactly what happens to these kids. I mean, you know, Josh goes missing and we never see him again. We assume terrible things happen to him because of a really graphic scene where you're just hearing him yelling in the distance, which is so... The things your imagination comes up with in those moments, especially considering what follows the next morning with, Heather finding his teeth all bundled up, it just, the things you start to imagine are so much worse than what they could show you on screen. And I mean, this is the criticism of too many found footage movies making things overly complex. The idea of found footage is to put you in a perspective of somebody going through something fairly traumatic, and not from the perspective of knowing everything. The idea that this is an isolated incident and you won't always have all the answers. A lot of things are going to be left open-ended. And Blair Witch, again, beautifully does it. It's the reason I like Paranormal Activity so much, is because it left things fairly open-ended. Nothing was definitively answered for us, and the characters themselves didn't really they didn't overcomplicate the situation. They were just like, well, it looks like we have a demon haunting us. And you just sort of see them start to unravel as the thing starts to take over their lives. And it's the same thing with Blair Witch. You just see these kids deteriorate as they're just slowly losing their minds, as they're just wishing they could get out of this situation. Too many found footage movies try to shoehorn in exposition. They try to shoehorn in all this other information. And too many of them now are trying to adopt the typical horror film tropes of, really annoying characters so we can just kill them off, which is not what I want in my found footage movies. I want authentic character types, which, yeah, you can argue Blair Witch, the characters aren't that likable. That's actually one of the main identifying traits of Heather, is the fact that she comes off as a bitch. But at the same time, it's realistic. She's a film director. She's a film student director. She wants her final product, and she's willing to do what she needs to get that product. And the idea, and of course the amazing lines that these kids came up with in this film, because the director and the producers were talking about this in the commentary, stuff like, did you prompt them on this line? Like, no, they just came up with that on their own. Like, this was not scripted. I think that's the best thing I can say about this movie, is that you have so many great lines, and you have such great these actors who emote so well and come off as so realistic, and yet none of it is really scripted. It's just, they're just given a general direction and they say go, and they watch from the distance. That's pretty much all these people did, was just let them off the leash and they let them see where it went. I think that's one of the most organic ways you're going to get a good found footage movie. I know some people may argue that there are better found footage movies, but to me, Blair Witch has set the bar so high that only a few have been able to match it for me, or even come close to it, I should say. That including Paranormal Activity. So that's my number 14. Come back tomorrow for my number 13, and keep watching to find out what my number 1 favorite film of all time is. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you later.